What started as record sales turned into the biggest crash in decades. Prices are tanking, loyalty is dead, and behind closed doors, execs are panicking. This isn't a dip, it's a death spiral. Stick around. The end of the video will change how you see every brand. The roar became a whimper. Walk into a dealership today and something feels off. Not just the eerie quiet, but the weight of stillness. Bikes that once turned highways into cathedrals now sit untouched beneath fluorescent lights. This is not just a sales slump, it's a cultural freeze. 5 years ago, motorcycles represented a rite of passage. Riders weren't just customers, they were part of a lineage, a brotherhood. But somewhere between the roaring rallies and weekend rides, something deeper began to fade. Riders got older and new ones never came. The freedom the machines promised started to look more like a luxury than a lifestyle. The average age of American motorcyclists has climbed past 50. That means fewer spontaneous road trips, fewer tattoos inked after sunset, and fewer stories passed from throttle to throttle. Even gear shops feel hollow now. You can still buy the jackets and the gloves, but the spirit is missing. The generation that once roared down Route 66 has kids in college and knees that crack. And Gen Z? They're not dreaming of Harleys. They're dreaming of silent electric scooters or skipping wheels altogether. Brands tried to modernize, flashier dashboards, Bluetooth-enabled helmets, digital gauges, but no software update can restore what was lost. The visceral emotion of rebellion. And that silence? It wasn't an accident, it was engineered. But what came next wasn't just cultural decay, it was financial intoxication on a national scale. If you're seeing what's happening in the motorcycle world right now, you're not alone. Smash that like button if you think the market's headed for even bigger changes, and share your predictions in the comments. Let's hear where you think the motorcycle industry is going. The pandemic sugar rush that broke the market. In 2020, motorcycle sales exploded. Executives rejoiced. Investors poured in. Suddenly, everyone believed the motorcycle market had come roaring back to life. But what looked like a long-awaited revival was just a sugar rush. Artificial, unsustainable, and dangerously misleading. Stuck at home during lockdowns, Americans turned to motorcycles as a symbol of escape. Sales spiked. Inventory vanished. Wall Street took notice and boardrooms went into overdrive. Manufacturers ramped up production, doubled orders, and hired like the boom would never end. For a moment, it looked like a miracle. But it was an illusion born of desperation. The spike wasn't from new riders, it was from bored ones. And as lockdowns lifted, those same riders returned to their old routines. The bikes they bought? They sat in garages, barely ticking the odometers past triple digits. Executives misread the moment. They mistook a panic-fueled trend for a cultural comeback. When the dust settled, companies were left with overproduction, bloated payrolls, and investors asking hard questions. Share prices that once soared now sagged under the weight of unrealistic forecasts. Worse, the industry had locked itself into contracts, marketing campaigns, and supply chain agreements that assumed eternal demand. When that demand evaporated, what remained was a glut of overpriced inventory and a rapidly cooling market. But the real cost wasn't in dollars, it was in trust. And trust would only erode further once manufacturers chased the worst possible solution. Exclusivity disguised as innovation. By the way, if you're still riding through this chaos, we've linked the gear we actually use in the description. Reliable stuff, no fluff. Premiumization poisoned the well. Faced with softening demand, manufacturers didn't lower prices to attract new riders, they raised them. The logic? If fewer people were buying, at least squeeze more out of each sale. The result was the premiumization era, and it backfired. Motorcycles once cost $8,000 or $9,000. Now, entry-level sport bikes with digital gadgets can push $15,000. Cruisers easily climb above $30,000 before tax, fees, or gear. Middle-class consumers didn't evolve out of motorcycles. They were priced out. Every new feature added a layer of distance between the product and the people who once gave it meaning. It wasn't just about affordability, it was about betrayal. Riders felt mocked. Marketing campaigns spoke of freedom while monthly payments crept into car loan territory. Customization, once a point of pride, became gated behind factory options and dealership upcharges. The whole thing started to feel like a luxury showroom, not a rebel's garage. Even worse, manufacturers ignored used buyers. Parts became proprietary. Repairs got expensive. Insurance premiums crept higher. Suddenly, the working-class biker, the very soul of motorcycle culture, was treated like an outdated demographic. The companies thought they were elevating the product. In truth, they were hollowing out their customer base. And when riders stopped believing, they stopped buying. But the final blow didn't come from culture or marketing. It came from cold, hard financing math that turned the showroom into a dead end. Financing just turned on the industry. It used to be simple. You picked out a bike, signed some papers, and rode off. Not anymore. Today, financing a motorcycle has become one of the most brutal choke points in the industry, and it's killing the sale before it even begins. Interest rates have soared. Monthly payments that once hovered around $150 now push $300 or more, just for a mid-tier cruiser. Banks are cautious. Lenders are tighter. Insurers are pricing younger riders out altogether. For first-timers, the numbers just don't add up. Dealerships are watching pre-approvals vanish. Credit scores that would have worked 3 years ago now trigger rejections. Lenders see motorcycles as high-risk, low-asset vehicles, especially in a market flooded with used inventory that depreciates faster than ever. Insurance companies have followed suit. Premiums on certain models have jumped by double digits, especially for riders under 25. The message is clear. Motorcycles aren't just a passion, they're a liability. Even bundling financing through manufacturer programs isn't saving the sale. With higher interest rates and stricter underwriting, easy financing has become a bait and switch. Customers walk in excited. They leave discouraged, confused, and in many cases gone for good. And that locked gate? It's called economic reality, and it's not opening anytime soon, but the Softail gamble would take this crisis and make it irreversible. Dealerships are bleeding out. If your local bike shop looks dark, it's not closed for lunch. It's dead. Across the country, independent motorcycle dealerships, especially family-run shops, have become the silent casualties of a market in collapse. These aren't big city, high-volume franchises with deep corporate pockets. These are legacy shops, passed down through generations, run by people who grew up with oil-stained hands and a wall of black and white photos of better days. They knew their customers by name. They let kids sit on bikes just to watch their faces light up. And now, they're watching everything fall apart. The inventory isn't moving. Floor plan financing, once a manageable risk, has become a strangling noose. For every unsold motorcycle gathering dust on the showroom floor, there's a loan clock ticking in the background. Miss a payment and the bank comes for the bikes. Miss another and the building's next. Some owners are selling personal assets just to keep the lights on, hoping for a summer rebound that may never come. But hope doesn't pay invoices, and loyalty doesn't cancel debt. The worst part? It didn't have to be this way. Manufacturers continued pumping out models no one ordered, forcing unwanted inventory onto dealers. Rebates came too late, co-op marketing vanished, and the cost of doing business soared while the foot traffic dried up. One dealer in Ohio described it bluntly. "We used to be the heartbeat of this town. Now we're a liability on the books." And as the lights go out across the country, something more than business is dying. It's the communal spirit of motorcycling itself. The handshake deals, the Saturday test rides, the local shop that made riders feel seen. That's not just retail. That's identity. And it's disappearing. But even as dealerships wither, another force has risen to fill the vacuum, and it's not helping. The used market turns cannibal. The used market was supposed to be a pressure valve. Now it's a wrecking ball. When new bike prices shot through the stratosphere, riders naturally turned to second-hand options. What they found were nearly new machines with barely any miles, listed for thousands less than their factory-fresh equivalents. That imbalance didn't just undercut the new market, it obliterated it. Private sellers, desperate to unload bikes bought during the pandemic hype, flooded online platforms with listings. Some were collectors flipping garage trophies, others were buyers who realized they didn't actually ride. But many were victims of harsh financing realities, forced to exit their loans by any means necessary. And in their urgency, they priced aggressively, slashing into dealership margins and creating a consumer perception that brand new bikes simply weren't worth it. This wasn't just an economic shift, it was a psychological one. Shoppers began treating dealerships like museums, places to browse, ask questions, and then go home to buy the same bike used for $5,000 less. Dealerships couldn't match those prices without eating into survival. The result? A feedback loop that punished every layer of the supply chain. Even worse, manufacturers failed to adapt. Instead of supporting certified pre-owned programs or incentivizing trade-ins, they doubled down on premium models. Meanwhile, the market was cannibalizing itself in broad daylight. An unregulated secondary economy rose from the ashes of showroom collapse, slick, fast-moving, and completely disconnected from the traditional pipeline. And that low-mileage bargain? It just devoured a brand-new sale. Multiply that by tens of thousands, and what you get is not just a downturn. You get a dismantling of the entire recovery structure the industry was counting on. Still, some manufacturers thought the solution was simple: make better bikes. What came next proved just how wrong they were. The bikes nobody wanted. These bikes weren't just bad, they made people hate riding. When product teams at several major manufacturers scrambled to chase emerging trends, what they delivered were Frankenstein machines born of panic, not passion. Electric hybrids no one asked for. Over-teched cruisers with tablet-sized dashboards. Retro-styled scramblers that looked great in concept art but handled like shopping carts. These weren't machines built by riders, they were built by marketers. And it showed. Focus groups were ignored. Rider forums mocked the early leaks. Test units quietly sat untouched at demo events. Still, manufacturers pressed forward, convinced the specs would win over skeptics. They didn't. Torque numbers looked great on paper but translated into jumpy, awkward throttle response. Lean-sensitive ABS sounded impressive until riders realized it was overriding their inputs mid-corner. One bike launched with no clutch lever, controlled entirely by software. It took less than a week before backlash forced an early recall. None of this was cheap. Development budgets ballooned, tooling costs rose, and every failed launch dragged dealer confidence further into the mud. One product lead privately admitted, "We built what we thought the future wanted. Turns out we forgot to ask the present." The problem wasn't the tech, it was the hubris behind it. The belief that branding and innovation could replace the emotional connection between rider and machine. That you could engineer cool, but cool isn't designed, it's felt. And in trying to outsmart the market, they alienated it instead. By the time companies tried to course correct, another crisis was brewing, one far bigger than any marketing misstep: when the factories went dark. You know it's bad when even the factories give up. In late-stage downturns, production cuts are inevitable. But what happened in the last 18 months wasn't a correction. It was an industrial retreat. Assembly lines that once hummed around the clock were reduced to skeleton crews. Some halted completely, waiting for orders that never came. Warehouses filled with unsold inventory, forcing logistics managers to lease external storage yards just to avoid PR disasters. Suppliers felt the first tremors. Then came the shutdowns. Small part manufacturers, especially in countries like Thailand, India, and Mexico, simply couldn't survive the volume drop. That fractured the supply chain in ways even large companies couldn't patch quickly. Frames were delayed. Wire harnesses went missing. One missing part could idle an entire factory. And when production did resume, it moved like molasses through a clogged system of bottlenecks and back orders. But the real heartbreak came on the factory floor. These weren't just numbers in a logistics report. These were line workers, many of them second or third generation, laid off after decades of service. Some were given 2 weeks' notice. Others found out through locked gates and unanswered HR lines. For them, the shutdown wasn't about industry cycles, it was about feeding families, about losing health care, about watching a trade that once promised dignity shrink into a ghost of itself. And that silence on the line? It's the sound of survival mode, not strategic pause, not efficiency optimization, just the raw, cold math of collapse. When demand disappears, production follows, and with it, the livelihoods of thousands. What comes next won't be determined by manufacturers or even the market. It will be shaped by the ripple effects now spiraling outward into labor, politics, consumer psychology, and beyond. Harley lost its voice, and so did everyone else. For decades, Harley-Davidson's brand wasn't just a marketing strategy, it was a mythology. The thrum of the engine, the leather jackets, the rebel ethos. It was Americana on 2 wheels, a visual and visceral symbol of defiance. You didn't buy a Harley to commute, you bought one to belong to a myth. Then came the rebrands, the pivot decks, the influencer campaigns, and the sterile press releases. In their desperate push to modernize, Harley's voice got scrubbed clean, sanitized, corporate. What replaced it wasn't just unrecognizable, it was forgettable. Instead of grit, we got gradients. Instead of grit-streak taglines etched in steel, we got keynote slides promising youth market engagement and urban activation campaigns. The people hired to revive Harley's image didn't grow up on Harleys. They grew up optimizing ad spend. And the audience noticed. Riders once moved by a raw, unfiltered identity began to feel like they were being sold a tech startup with handlebars. The disconnect spread faster than the brand teams could adjust. Instagram feeds filled with paid partnerships that looked like parodies. Every attempt to recapture authenticity rang hollow because it wasn't coming from the saddle. It was coming from a boardroom. Freedom doesn't A/B test. And when your marketing sounds more like a sales funnel than a creed, your audience checks out. And when a brand forgets who it is, writers remember and walk away. The lessons everyone forgot. They had 17 years to prepare. They used none of them. The financial collapse of 2008 gutted the motorcycle industry. Credit dried up, dealerships folded, and factories hit pause. But from that wreckage came knowledge. Painful, hard-earned lessons about who buys bikes, how they buy them, and what risk the industry can and cannot take. Those lessons sat in binders, were spoken in exit interviews, and were echoed by every dealership that barely survived. And then, just like that, they were ignored. As soon as the market started to rebound, the mistakes started to repeat. Inventory ballooned, prices crept up, R&D focused on pushing margins, not expanding markets. Warnings were brushed aside as pessimism. Executives who should have known better leaned back on old habits, betting that legacy would carry them. But the world had changed. The economy was different. The consumer was different. And while Harley reassembled the same old puzzle, the picture on the box had shifted. The result? A collapse with no cushion, no bailout on the way, no wave of returning riders with cash in hand. Because unlike 2008, this isn't a crisis, it's a reckoning. One that the company saw coming and chose to ignore. This time, the crash may not come with a second chance. And just beyond the rubble, others are already rebuilding something else, something leaner, younger, and global. The real boom is quiet, electric, and far away. In cities like Chongqing, Pune, and Hanoi, the hum of electric scooters and smart two-wheelers is no longer a novelty. It's normal. These aren't concept bikes shown at overpriced expos. They are mass-market, durable, digitally connected machines priced for everyday people. While American and European companies obsessed over reviving heritage and adding luxury trim, companies like Ola, Ather, and Horwin were busy flooding the global south with clean, affordable, connected mobility. Electric startups in Asia aren't just making bikes, they're making platforms, fully integrated systems with GPS tracking, remote diagnostics, subscription battery swaps, and onboard AI. Their riders don't carry tools. They carry apps. Their dealers don't upsell, they onboard. And while Western giants fight to protect showrooms and legacy parts, These disruptors are bypassing the entire traditional sales funnel. The numbers tell the story. In just 3 years, India went from fringe EV interest to nearly 50% two-wheeler electric sales in urban zones. Vietnam's VinFast quietly overtook multiple Japanese models on its home turf. Chinese factories are exporting millions of lightweight electrics to Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Entire continents Harley and Triumph barely acknowledged. This isn't a blip. It's a rewiring of how global riders see mobility. The future isn't wrapped in chrome, it's matte white plastic, app-synced dashboards, and battery packs you slide out like a drawer. And the scariest part? Their bikes actually make sense. But that shift in purpose wasn't just industrial, it was generational. From freedom machines to subscription gadgets. The romance once tethered to motorcycles, the great American road, the rebellion, the outlaw narrative, has been replaced with QR codes and subscription tiers. In cities from Berlin to Jakarta, Gen Z and millennial riders are skipping ownership entirely. Monthly rentals, ride-share mopeds, and gig economy scooters now dominate curbside infrastructure. This isn't about apathy, it's about utility. Why finance a $30,000 cruiser when your phone unlocks a ride in 30 seconds? The joy of throttle hasn't died. It's just been recontextualized. Now, freedom is freedom from parking permits, fuel costs, and maintenance schedules. Younger riders don't crave ownership, they crave access. They grew up with Spotify, Netflix, and Dropbox. A motorcycle to them is no different, a lifestyle as a service model. The hardware is disposable. The data is what counts. Brands that once sold mythologies now find themselves irrelevant in a world where experience trumps equipment. Try pitching a roaring V-twin to someone who's never heard of Easy Rider and gets more thrill from carving traffic on an electric moped than hauling weight on a boulevard cruiser. There's no shame in this evolution. In fact, it's deeply practical. But it leaves legacy brands stranded between nostalgia and novelty. They can't charge a premium for rebellion when rebellion is now a rental code. It's not rebellion anymore. It's a service plan. And yet, for all the changes, something stubborn refuses to die. The future still rides. Not all bikes are doomed, just the ones that stopped listening. A strange thing happened after the crash. Some brands got sharper. They shed the bloat, killed the chrome, and finally started listening. Not to shareholders, but to riders. Royal Enfield doubled down on simplicity, launching mid-capacity bikes that balance performance with affordability. Zero quietly refined its electric lineup into something that feels like a real alternative, not just a science project. Even BMW, long accused of techno-elitism, has introduced streamlined models with analog charm and modern safety. These bikes aren't chasing trends, they're filling needs. And that shift, from mythology to mission, is key. The future of motorcycles won't be defined by horsepower wars or throwback styling. It'll be about utility, sustainability, and story. Who does the bike serve? What does it allow its rider to become? What friction does it remove from the world? Brands that win this new era will master 3 things: story, simplicity, and soul. Story because narrative still matters, just not the old one. Simplicity because complexity is now a tax. And soul because riders still want to feel something beneath the frame. This isn't about saving the past. It's about riding forward with purpose. The brands that combine story, simplicity, and soul will win. And that brings us to the one person who actually decides what happens next. Do you agree with the trends we're seeing, or do you think we're just in the middle of a temporary dip? Drop your thoughts below and let's dive into the conversation. Don't forget to like if you're keeping an eye on this market shift. Buy, sell, or wait. Your next move. Let's strip the drama and talk straight. The market is cracking. Prices are volatile. Inventory is piling up in some regions and disappearing in others. If you're considering a purchase, whether it's a big touring bike, a budget commuter, or even your first electric, now is the time to think tactically. If you already own a premium gasoline bike, expect resale value to decline faster than before. Insurance rates are creeping up, and some lenders are tightening credit for depreciating segments. If you've been thinking of selling, do it while you still have leverage. If you're in the market for something new, pay close attention to manufacturer incentives. Some brands are offering unheard-of discounts, low APR financing, and bundle offers just to move stock. There may never be a more buyer-friendly window if you're smart. But if you're unsure, waiting is valid. The next 12 months will be decisive. Several brands are launching lower-cost electrics, and the infrastructure gap is closing rapidly. If you can hold off, you may end up with more options, better tech, and lower long-term cost. This isn't about panic. It's about power. For the first time in years, consumers hold the upper hand. This market's being rebuilt in real time. The smart ones are already watching. Before we wrap up, make sure you don't miss our next video, where we're revealing some hidden gems in the motorcycle world that are stupidly underrated. If you're looking to grab a bike that's truly a steal, trust me, you'll want to see this. Click here to watch.